Welcome back, guys. Got something completely different on the channel today.
Yeah, this is different for us.
Doing a little bit of history. We're coming to this one after we did some history with the Star Spangled Banner video. Apparently some people were saying in those comments that that's not entirely true in the video, but that they've embellished it a bit. I don't know. We're not experts on American history, but hopefully we learned some true facts in that video. Yeah. Anyway, it's not going to rehash that one. We also did the Terry Fox one. Growing up in Canada, we loved Terry Fox.
We did.
Great Canadian, one of the greats of all time, if not the great of all time. Anyway, so that's why we've kind of arrived at a little bit of a different topic for our reaction videos. And the sports videos are getting a little bit less in terms of the quality of content out there that we have found. So we thought we'd try something new.
Swapping in for some history.
Yeah, we're doing a little trade here. So if you guys enjoy some of the history aspects, then maybe we can do a little bit more. Maybe you can comment below and let us know any other stuff that you'd like to see. This is a two-part series of World War II. So there's World War II Part 1 and World War II Part 2. And so we can check out Part 2, obviously, as well. But anyways, I've heard this is a good video. Haven't seen it. I'm a history buff. I like learning about history. And so I figured, why not check this one out? And maybe you guys will enjoy it with us. So cool. As usual, just remember to hit the like button, leave us a comment, hit the subscribe bell, notification. So not the subscribe bell, the subscribe button with the notification bell is what I was referring to. Anyways, let's get to it. World War II Oversimplified.
It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war, but his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
Already learned something about Mussolini.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army. Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the losing.
So that's crazy because I didn't know anything about that from the Italian perspective, because we learned so much about Germany related to World War II. Yeah. And I knew like Italy's involvement, but I didn't know about Mussolini and kind of where that whole movement came from.
Yeah, and like how that fit in.
Yeah, I knew more about Hitler and Germany and where that kind of, bubbled up from, but nothing about Italy. So that was cool. I didn't know anything about that. What about you?
No, I didn't know any of that either.
Sure.
Side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize.
We'll rewind it, just so I don't miss it.
Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attended a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had...
So I think as well with that, they said that the chancellor had made him prime minister, right? And I think actually he didn't have a choice. There was something that took place in that process where basically Hitler forced him. He had no option other than to put him into that position, or he was going to lose his position or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, there's probably more to that. I could be wrong. The other thing I was going to mention was it's so wild that the influence of World War I and the pressures that they put on Germany after World War I is literally what caused World War II.
Yeah, how that led into
so
that.
much later,
Yeah.
decades later.
Literally, yeah.
But just, and the fact that they were supposed to reduce their military down, they had to, had the economic sanctions, all this stuff, and it did nothing but cause more issues down the road.
Yeah, because it festered forever.
Yeah, and they built up animosity,
Yeah.
right?
Then they came back with a vengeance.
had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies.
I just caught that.
Like Mike, the situation.
The situation. Here's
Yeah.
the situation. I was like, what was that person? And then I put two and two together. But I actually forgot about that aspect too on the east side of things where they invaded into Korea. I totally forgot that Japan entered into Korea and had that conflict with Russia on the
So I don't know
eastern
anything
front.
about that. So Japan entered into Korea, and then the West got mad and said you can't do that. But then Russia came in anyways and started to take their stuff, and then so they came back and beat Russia
Basically,
and
yeah.
occupied it.
Yeah, it was entering into China. I think they had conflict with China originally, and then so it festered from there. But I completely forgot for that Eastern conflict where it kind of originated, because you only hear about like the Japan-US conflict
Yeah.
that instilled, but you didn't. I don't remember hearing much about that.
Yeah.
And all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you what... Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by...
It's so wild again. Like, I had no idea that Japan made that much inroad into China.
Yeah, no, I had no idea.
And this is like less than 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And you see the state of China in the world now, right? Nobody would dare do that to China at this point, right?
Yeah.
So the evolution of China as a country is pretty remarkable to think that, less than 100 years ago, Japan was entering in there and taking over all their land and doing whatever they wanted to without any support from anybody else, China not having support from anybody else. And now, like I said, the roles would be completely reversed.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting because I feel like, in my experience at least, when I learned about World War II, which was just in like high school history class, they only really teach you about the westernized perspective of things,
Yes.
right? Like how like Canada and the US and what they did. And then like, a lot of it was centered around the Holocaust in Germany, right?
Of
But
course.
you don't really learn about any of this stuff about Italy or
Yep.
Japan. It was more of just like they were the sidekicks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any atrocity is terrible,
Yeah.
right? But like you said, we only learned from the westernized perspective when there was a lot of other colonies and people around the world and populations
being
that
impacted.
suffered. And we don't learn about it, right? And like you said, that's kind of you're taught what you people want you to be taught.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always thought from a historical context in general. When I, maybe predating some of this stuff, but I've thought when I think about history, I'm like, how much of it actually is true?
Yeah. Or
You
like
know?
how much are you only getting one side
Right.
of the coin?
Because whoever wins the war or has the net result out
Yeah,
of the
everyone's
historical
writing the history
conflict
book.
is going to write the history book,
Yeah.
which then you're going to learn about. And they're going to leave
Yeah.
out all the things that they did. They don't want anybody to know that, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's always a thought that's entered into my mind.
China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future. Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your armfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the phony war, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris and...
That's wild.
Yeah.
Like just seeing this in real time, the way they're talking about it,
Yeah.
it really is eye-opening to see the magnitude of how quick, like, I mean, it's a long war, right?
Yeah.
But how quickly things just went
Can
from one to
escalate.
the next, to the next,
Yeah.
to the next.
And it's cool to see the progressions of like all the steps.
Yeah, to really, you know, they hone in on the specifics really well in this video. It's also eye-opening when you see the reason why, you know, Hitler was able to advance so much was because in World War I, the repercussions of World War I, right? So meaning they didn't want war because they just dealt with all that. And they're like,
Yeah.
we don't want to do this again, so we're going to avoid it by all means possible.
Yeah, and then they get to this point where he's taken over half of their freaking continent.
Yeah, well, they left them unprepared. You had one side, right, that won the war and was like, okay, like, yeah, we won. Let's celebrate. Let's relax. Let's get rid of all those tough times. The other side that lost in Germany was so vengeful and just led to this total collapse, basically, by the Allied forces being not prepared in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's like watching this from up to this point, you would think that they wouldn't even have a hope in hell of winning.
Yeah, well, and you see the leadership, right? I think, you know, Winston Churchill made a pretty big deal coming
Yeah.
into the fold, but more importantly, the U.S., and that's how I think, you know, we get into
Where we're
the
getting to
later changes in the war.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's finish it up.
France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
And that was part one.
Crazy how fast it goes when they're like, explaining everything. You get so like into listening that, almost, I guess 13 and a half minutes just flew by.
Yeah, I think they pack a whole lot into this that you have to really stay engaged. I mean, I there's comedic parts I wasn't even like paying attention to or taking in because
You're so locked
I'm
in.
just like trying to, piece one point of the information to the next. And so they did a great job in really telling this, like you said, in 13 and a half minutes, this whole story. And so much of it, I don't even know if we touched on in school.
Yeah, I think that I really enjoy the way that they do it because, they kind of say oversimplified, but it's, I think that they just explain it in a way that's really digestible. And by bringing those little pieces of comedy in there, it like lightens it a little bit so it's easier to understand.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's one thing that like I always struggled with history is that it's just talked about in such like a boring way, like in a textbook. That's just like, it's hard to absorb and to fully wrap your head around it, right? Especially like when you're like in high school learning about that. So I just never really found it very digestible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't find it necessarily all the time boring, but different people have different ways that they like to process information, right? I think this is a good balance between, having a lot of data, a lot of information with, like you said, a comedic visual representation, fast narration, which keeps you kind of engaged throughout, where, I would say, some people may disagree with you that it's always boring. Some people like to watch a documentary or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the event is boring. I'm saying reading about it in a textbook.
No, I know.
Boring.
I know you're saying that. But some people like to read textbooks. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? You don't. That's okay.
Yeah.
You're allowed to not enjoy that. You enjoy this better. That's why we're...
or like it's like you said, a documentary or something. Like something that's like more visual, I guess. For me.
I mean, but even that, I would say you're not going to voluntarily say, let's watch that documentary, whereas I probably would.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes.
And that's just a difference of opinion or taste or, and so I'm not saying that you wouldn't watch any of them. I would documentaries, I think, are something that some people love them or they hate them.
Yeah. I guess
like,
it all depends on your learning style, right?
Yeah. And so, like you said, you can learn in different ways. And this is, I think, a great way of doing it because it's good for everybody. That's the key.
Yeah. And I think that, like you said, they keep it short and sweet, but informative, right? And I think a lot of people, especially with like the attention span of people these days, like maybe watching like a 3-hour documentary is a little bit daunting, whereas like this in bite-sized clips. I think it's cool too that it's in 2 parts because you can watch one of them and decide if you want to continue. Right?
Yeah. But also, I mean, like not everybody wants to, like, this is what I was getting at. Not everybody wants to sit down and watch a 3-hour documentary because they just don't want to waste time on that.
Yeah.
They don't want to waste time learning about something that happened almost 100 years ago and spend 3 hours watching that. Other people do. That's what I was just saying, that like some people prioritize what they're going to spend their time doing. Yeah. And you may, I'm not saying always, may find that to be a waste of your time or a little more boring, and you might like to watch something like this, which in 25 minutes you get the same effect in your opinion. So other people might like the nuanced little details in there of the specifics of how Mussolini came to be, from this person and that person and that person and that person.
Yeah.
Other people might be like, bro, I don't give a let me just get to the point of the story. And I understand that.
Yeah, I think too, right? The more that your interest develops in something, the more time you're going to want to spend doing it, right? So something like this is really cool also for people who are like maybe interested in a topic and want to just get accustomed to the higher level view of it or the oversimplified view of it. Yeah. And then if you do want to learn more, you can always go read a book or watch a documentary or something.
Well, I mean, did you like this part one?
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
Yeah. Well, that's the main point then. Yeah. You enjoyed this. That's all that matters. That's what we came to do, right?
Yeah.
So
and hopefully, I like this. It was cool.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. I enjoyed it personally. If you did enjoy it, hit the like button for us. Leave us a comment. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell. Make sure that you come back and check out our next video. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.